Faith that works. James would want us to know that our faith in Jesus should have direct impact in our everyday life, in the way we connect with our families, our neighbors, our co-workers, the way we connect with each other. It's a faith that actually works itself out in our everyday lives. And I trust that you have been challenged and inspired by the book of James as I have been teaching it. If you've missed any talk on the book of James in the last several weeks, they're all listed in our website on our media page under archives. And I just really encourage you to listen through those in your free time. This morning is, I believe, part 7, and it speaks about peace. James speaks about wisdom and peace usually go in hand, that people who have wisdom are people who plant seeds of peace wherever they go. They're peacemakers. And so James asks the question in the text that we're about to read, who among you has wisdom? Who among you has understanding? I want us to think about that question. And I want us to consider our own lives. Would I be one who has wisdom? One who has understanding? James talks about there's two kinds of wisdom. There's an earthly wisdom, a wisdom that the culture and society would say, boy, this is what it looks like to be wise. But then he also flips the coin and he says, actually, there is a heavenly wisdom, a wisdom that comes from God, that is centered around God. And here's what it looks like. We're going to read it in the text. You know, I am convinced, as I've been reflecting on this text in my own life, is that many times wisdom is evidenced in people's lives in circumstances that are sometimes very difficult, in circumstances that are at times very harsh, in the midst at times of maybe persecution. In fact, this text is written in that context. The people of God, the church in Jerusalem, led by this bishop named James, is speaking to them amidst much persecution. They are being persecuted. They are experiencing much harshness and anger towards them. Much injustice is coming their way. And James writes to them, this is our opportunity to actually show evidence that we are people of wisdom. That rather than repaying harshness with harshness, may we repay it with goodness. May we repay it with genuine wisdom. And he exemplifies what that looks like in just a few moments. Like I said, I really believe that leaders and individuals show their wisdom amidst harshness, amidst difficulty. I think of one of the great leaders in the Old Testament. His name's Moses. Moses was, yes, a man filled with great wisdom, but he was also considered the most humble man on the planet, the scriptures say. Usually, wisdom and humility go hand in hand. And there's this moment in his life where his very own siblings, Miriam and Aaron, turn against him, and they begin to criticize him, and they begin to criticize his wife, and they become envious. See, earthly wisdom sometimes has some envy mixed into it. In many ways, these siblings of Moses start spreading a report. Because of their envy, they start saying, you know, God doesn't just speak through Moses. He can speak through us, when in that moment in history, God only spoke through Moses in many ways. He was the mouthpiece of God to the people of God. And so they were jealous and envious, and so they started to spread a bad report of their very own brother. And God was angry because of their choices. And so he came down, and there was smoke and clouds, and in his anger left Miriam filled with a disease called leprosy because of her actions towards her brother, to the man that God had called and appointed. And it's interesting to me what Moses did, and it showed his not only humility, but his wisdom. In the midst of that wound, I'm sure, his siblings turned against him. In the midst of his own experience of harshness from his siblings, he prayed to God, said, God, would you heal my sister? Would you heal her? It's one of those moments in the life of a leader that exemplified and showed evidence that this man, yes, was filled with humility, but much wisdom as well. We see it in the life of Jesus, obviously, our ultimate example. Jesus, in many ways, was slandered by the religious folks of his day. He's a drunkard. He's a sinner. Look who he spends time with. He's evil. These religious ones went around putting heavy loads on people's shoulders, telling them they were never good enough for God. And Jesus walks into that scene in humility, with obvious great wisdom. And he says, come to me, all you who are weary and laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Walk with me, for I am what? Gentle and meek. Here's that humility, that meekness, that gentleness that comes in the midst of harshness. Jesus exemplifies and shows evidence of his wisdom in how he responds amidst his greatest accusers. It's in that context, in many ways, in the midst of harshness and persecution, that James speaks to the church of Jerusalem, but obviously speaks to us at Heartland, a church connected. And so the text in chapter 3, 13 to 18, speaks about two kinds of wisdom. The text goes like this. Can we flip? Who is wise and understanding among you? Who is it? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. So in many ways, James is saying, don't necessarily in this particular context ask for wisdom, but he's saying, show your wisdom by the way you live your life, by your good deeds. In the way you do your good deeds, show wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. James is serious about this, isn't he? For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is, first of all, pure, it's peace-loving, it's considerate, it's submissive, it's full of mercy and good fruit, it's impartial, it's sincere. Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. It's an interesting list that James gives us as to what heavenly peace looks like. It's all about our behavior. In fact, somebody might ask, what is wisdom? By definition, what does wisdom mean? By definition, wisdom is a moral rather than an intellectual quality. It goes beyond just what we know and our intellect to how we live out what we know. Wisdom is evidenced by our behavior. Knowledge that is gained by having many experiences in life. Wisdom is not simply cognitive mastery, but it's behavioral. In many ways, James outlines it for us. Wisdom is evidenced by the way we treat each other, even amidst harshness. And all those lists of attributes of heavenly wisdom, which we'll get to in a moment, speak about our interaction with one another. And so James asks us this morning, who is wise among you? Who is wise among you? His first point is to draw a picture of what earthly wisdom looks like. Here's what he starts off with. He says, this is what earthly wisdom looks like. And he talks about it in verse 14 and 16. Very clearly, he draws a picture. He says, if you harbor bitter envy, in another translation, and some scholars would say is the better translation, speaks about overzealousness. When you want something so bad that you're willing to hurt others to get it. Bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts. Do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come from heaven, but is earthly. It's unspiritual. It's demonic. Why do you think he brings up that word demonic? We'll get to that in a moment. But think about that. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder in every evil practice. You see, earthly wisdom advocates bitter envy or overzealousness. What does James mean by this? Extreme fidelity that could resort to violence and bloodshed. The term is often used to describe those who are willing to muster the courage to root out all the unfaithful, cowardly people around. That's what James is saying. Sometimes in our culture, that's advocated. Eliminate all those that are different from you, from your belief system. Be harsh and angry towards anybody who infringes on what you feel is the right way to go. And James is saying to the community of Christ, you're experiencing this from your persecutors, but may you not repay it with evil. May you not be just as overzealous that you're willing to shed blood to prove your point. In many ways, it's to be ferocious, emotively expressive, harsh, and angry. You see, it's easy, let's face it, when we have experienced harshness, when we've experienced words that have hurt us and wounded us, when we've experienced persecution, what can happen in our hearts is that we can grow some anger and some bitterness to the point of overzealousness, of overtaking those individuals with the same kind of harshness and anger. And James is saying that's an earthly kind of wisdom. That's not a godly kind of wisdom. Jesus comes in peace. Not with harshness and anger. He repays evil with good. Secondly, James says earthly wisdom advocates selfish ambition. Now, ambition is not all that bad, is it? I hope my boys grow up to be ambitious kids. Right? I want them to work hard in life. I want them to work hard in their studies. I want them to be great citizens of our community. I want them to be ambitious as it relates to doing the things of God. I want them to be risk takers. That's all great things. But ambition goes wrong when it's selfish. When it becomes about us and rising up in the ranks, not caring who we knock over on the way there. And many times the cultural wisdom says, do whatever it takes to get there. It's an earthly kind of wisdom. You see, to be ambitious is not all bad. It's when ambition becomes self-focused that it could be damaging to the community at large. It could be damaging in a church when we all have our own preferences and our likes and dislikes, and if we don't get what I like, then we may be vulnerable to being self-consumed. We live in a culture that's all about me and what's best for me. And if we're not careful, it can seep into our own hearts, and we become self-focused in our ambitions. Whereas Paul says in Philippians very clearly, he says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. You see, when we're focused on our own selfish ambition, obviously what the tendency will be is that you will engage with those who can get you where you want to get, but all those that don't mean anything to you or can't help you, you dismiss, you label, you mistreat. But Paul says, do nothing. Nothing. Do nothing within a spiritual context that is of selfish ambition. Do nothing in your work environment that is focused on just self. But rather, in humility, consider others better than yourself. Obviously, this motto cuts against the grain of our culture many times. It's an earthly kind of wisdom. And James goes as far as saying earthly wisdom has a formula. And at the end of the formula, there are some huge negative ramifications. He makes this point. Bitter envy or overzealousness, depending on your translation this morning. If you couple bitter envy and overzealousness, this ferociousness, this angst, this anger, and you couple that with selfish ambition, look out, because it'll equal disorder and evil. When we become so self-focused and so focused on our own selfish ambitions, and we couple that with this ferocious overzealousness that wants to erase anybody who has a different ideology of ours, it turns into a whole whack of disorder and evil. Can you imagine if the Church of Christ, the people of God, walk in with selfish ambitions and overzealousness about certain things? It will fracture this community, bring all sorts of disorder. And even beyond that, it'll bring all kinds of evil. James says it's demonic. Why does he say demonic? You see, overzealousness and selfish ambition break loose any moral anchors in our life on the part of Christ followers so that it's all about control and dominance. Those two things become our guiding lights. In fact, in many ways, that's where evil all started. The evil one was an angel, but he wasn't satisfied with just being an angel. He had some selfish ambitions. He wanted to beat the top. And because of that, it created all kinds of issues. He got kicked out of heaven along with a third of the angels that are now his demons. And they want to create all kinds of havoc in our life. They want to replicate their sin in us. It was all about dominance and control. It's a sad day when the Christ community becomes filled with dominance and controlling attitudes and spirits. In many ways, in Jesus' day, that's what was happening with the religious leaders. They were going around telling people they weren't as good as them. They didn't read enough. They didn't know the scriptures enough. They didn't give enough. They didn't fast enough. They weren't good enough for God. And they walked around discouraged and heavy laden and burdened. And that's why. Because they wanted to control these folks. They wanted to domineer over them. That's when Jesus comes on the scene and he says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble." I'm the opposite of these angry, bitter envy, self-absorbed religious leaders. I am gentle and humble, and you will find rest for your souls. Take my yoke upon you, for it is easy, my burden is light. James flips the page. The other kind of wisdom is a heavenly wisdom. He says this is what earthly wisdom looks like. It's filled with self-absorption and selfish ambitions and bitter envy and overzealousness. But this is what heavenly wisdom looks like. This is a picture of what wisdom that is centered around God. This is what it looks like. He says, but the wisdom that comes from heaven is, first of all, think about these words with me this morning. It's pure. Who among you is wise? Who among you has understanding? The one who has purity in their life. It's the one who loves peace, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. All those things allow us to plant seeds of peace. That's why he encapsulates this whole portion of Scripture by saying, peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. So James draws us a beautiful portrait of what wisdom from heaven looks like. He starts with the word pure. He gives us 7 attributes of heavenly wisdom. Wisdom attribute number 1 is pure. Wisdom from above is free from moral pollution and therefore entails this sense of total sincerity and devotion to the Lord. The one who has wisdom in their heart is the one who in many ways desires God by His Spirit to put His spotlight into our hearts. Holy Spirit, can you just illuminate the stuff in me that isn't pleasing to you? Those thoughts, those motivations, those actions and reactions that aren't pleasing to you. May you show them to me because, oh God, I so want you to cleanse me, wash me. I so want to be right with you, God. I want to have peace with you. And so, God, may you purify me. Who is wise among you is the one who is pure in heart. There's a sense that they want to be right with God. There's a sense that they want to live a light in the light of the Spirit. In many ways, gracious words are an indication of pure wisdom. When we're pure with our words towards others, it's an indication of wisdom. Wisdom attribute number 2, James says, peace-loving. The wise person loves peace. They love peace in their heart. They love to see peace amongst each other. They love to create peace. They love peace as opposed to angst, anger, selfish ambitions, as opposed to all of that stuff that's earthly. The heavenly wise person is the one who loves peace. You see, the peaceable person is not simply the tranquil person. This goes beyond personality types here. It goes beyond just being a tranquil person at rest with himself or herself, but the person who uses the tongue and gifts and behaviors to foster peace with God, peace with themselves, peace with others, and peace with the community and world at large. This is what James is saying to the Christ community who's being persecuted harshly, saying, let us love peace. Let us not fall into the same pattern as the secular world would and repay evil with evil, but let us love peace and let us love to create it. James is advocating that the Christ follower is to live peaceably and to create peace. That is evidence of one who is wise. Wisdom attribute number 3, he says, gentle and considerate. The wise person, as he or she lives out their life, shows evidence of being gentle and considerate of others. You see, the zealous and ambitious individual who no doubt remembers moments when his or her honor has been assaulted or called into question. Has that ever happened to you? Where you have been assaulted, not necessarily physically, but your reputation? The ambitious person who is focused on self will never forget that. They mark it down in their journals because retribution is being schemed. But the one who is wise in the eyes of heaven is the one who is a gentle person, who will not only drop that moment from memory, but learn from the situation. Strive to improve. Maybe even though that harshness was done with an evil intent, maybe there's something of truth hidden in there somewhere about me and my life that I need to rectify. There's this sense of, I want to improve, but we'll also work to create peace in the community in a non-combative manner. So when our character is attacked or reputation, the wise person still responds with this level of gentleness, this level of consideration of others in a non-combative manner. Wisdom attribute number 4, James says, is submissive and willing to yield. The wise person shows evidence of submission and a willingness to yield. Doesn't mean the wise person doesn't at times stand up for what they truly believe, but the wise person also is quick to listen and slow to speak. The wise person is willing to learn from situations and perhaps even change. The wise person sits around other councils and hears different perspectives, maybe a perspective they've never thought of, and maybe they're willing to say, I never thought of it that way, but I think it's true. And I think I'm going to change a few things about my life because of what I have just heard. The wise person is willing to be submissive and willing to yield. Other descriptive words would be compliant, persuadable, conciliatory, obedient. The foolish person doesn't even want to hear it. It's my way or the highway. The way I've always thought about this is the only way and the right way, and everybody else is wrong. The wise person at least listens. And maybe willing to submit and yield to another way. A wise person nurtures this willingness to listen and to change. We do well to have someone to whom we are accountable, whether it be a friend, a pastor, or a mentor. People in our lives who care enough to help us grow. People in our lives who love us enough to tell us the truth. The wise person realizes that they probably have some blind spots in their life, and I probably should put some other people around the table of my life. And those people will, as they speak to me, I will honestly take to heart their words and evaluate and think, and if it means changing, I'll do it. The wise person is like that. The foolish person is stuck in their way. They do the same thing over and over again, and it leads to their folly. Wisdom attribute number 5, James says, heavenly wisdom is full of mercy and good fruit. What is mercy? Not getting what we do deserve is what mercy is. Not getting what we do deserve. All of us in this room have experienced the mercy of God, haven't we? Lavished upon us, not getting what we do deserve. Kind of like Miriam. She didn't deserve that healing. She deserved wrath, but God remembered mercy. Moses remembered mercy. James is saying the wise person, in the midst of receiving rash and maybe mistreatment, the wise person, rather than retributing that, rather than retaliating, expresses mercy, even though it's undeserved. There will be much fruit that is bared by that attitude. Both mercy and good fruits are shaped by the Jesus Creed. Love your neighbor as yourself. Who's my neighbor, Jesus? That question was asked, wasn't it? The neighbor is not just the friend of yours who you like barbecuing with. Your neighbor is even at times the one who has wounded you. Love your neighbor as yourself. Be the wise person who exhibits mercy even though it is undeserved. Because the wise are peacemakers. They sow seeds of peace. And when you sow seeds of peace, you will bear a harvest of righteousness in your life. In many ways, it's like what Dr. Jim said. It's the kind of attitude that says, God, I'm going to be still in you because you are God. You're vindicator. My life is in your hands. Lord, I will plant seeds and I'll leave their attitude and their actions to you. But I will exemplify mercy, oh God. Wisdom attribute number 6, impartial, James says. The wise person shows evidence by being impartial. A few weeks ago, I spoke about this topic, about favoritism and how there should be no favoritism in the local church because everybody's created in the image of God and should be treated with dignity and respect. No matter what their socioeconomic background is, no matter what the color of skin they have, no matter what their age is, no matter whether they're male or female, they need to be treated with dignity and respect. Well, it comes up again in the next chapter. James says, heavenly wisdom is evidenced by being impartial. You see, partiality does something that's very wounding in communities, doesn't it? Partiality creates a sense of those who are in and those who are out. That's the kind of environment that's unsafe. Well, if you think like me, then you're in. If you look like me, you're in. But if you don't look like me, you're out. And if you don't think like me, you're out as well. James says, heavenly wisdom is the kind of attitude that just creates a safe place for people. It's the type of attitude that ensures that there is no partiality. All people are treated with respect and dignity because they're created in the image of God. Finally, wisdom attribute number 7, James says, heavenly wisdom is sincere and without hypocrisy. It's sincere. Another translation says without hypocrisy. That word hypocrisy comes from this word that talks about acting. A hypocrite is somebody who makes a show, who acts something, but then is somebody totally different. Heavenly wisdom, the wise among you are those who are sincere. Their word matters. Their life matches what they say. They're without hypocrisy. They're sincere before the Lord, and they're sincere amongst their peers and their brothers and sisters in Christ. That is evidence of wisdom. The foolish one makes an act, says a lot of things, but their lives don't match up. Again, the foolish one will experience their folly. Sin always catches up. We can fool each other. We can't fool God. As we've sung this way, He's all present. He's everywhere. He knows my thoughts. He knows my motivations. He knows my actions. He knows what I'm like at home. He knows what I'm like in my private moments. The one who is wise desires to be sincere. Is the one who wants no hypocrisy in their life. Hypocrisy includes this contradiction between one's claims and one's behavior. Beautiful picture of what heavenly wisdom looks like. James asks, who among you is wise? Wisdom goes much beyond intellect. It goes to behavior. It's evidenced in the way we treat each other. The wise come to the surface amidst some difficult moments in life. Amidst harshness sometimes, they show their true colors in those very moments. Which is why James encapsulates this entire passage at the very end by saying, peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. You see, when we're pure, we're planting seeds of peace. When we're obviously loving peace, that's going to be a big part of our life. When we're gentle and considerate, when we're submissive and willing to yield, when we're merciful, when we're impartial, sincere, and without hypocrisy, we are planting seeds of peace. And we will bear a wonderful harvest of righteousness if we do that. That's what heavenly wisdom looks like. May we be guarded against this earthly wisdom that speaks about this bitter envy and overzealousness that tramples over people and mistreats people with great anger and ferocity. Sometimes I even hear from pulpits where the teachers say church should be militant. No, that's not what Jesus is like. Jesus comes in peace. We're peacemakers. We're a community that creates peace amidst a whole lot of chaos in our world. As the worship team comes, I was praying throughout the week about this message, and I thought of the words of Paul as well in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 1. He says, knowledge puffs up. It puffs us up. It could bring all kinds of arrogance and pride, but love, it builds up. Knowledge puffs up. Love builds up. And then in chapter 13 of the same letter to the church of Corinth, Paul puts this love chapter in there, and he says, if I can fathom all the mysteries of the world, if I can have all kinds of knowledge, I have all the intellect, I'm a smart person, but if I don't love, it amounts to absolutely nothing. Who among us is wise? The one who shows evidence in the way they do their good deeds. The one who is considerate. The one who is gentle. The one who is pure, sincere without hypocrisy. The one who's willing to yield and submit. These are all attributes of heavenly wisdom. God, may you find this in me. May you find it in this church over and over and over again. May this church be the kind of church that sows peace in a world that is so chaotic and angry.